Yo, Skulls here, and in this video we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things in the game right now, creative spaces. We're going to go more into detail about build limits, how they work, and what contributes to the build limit. I got my hands on this really cool chart that gives a lot of information as to how much space things take up, why they take up so much space, and even more information that can be helpful. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to a user named 𝐀𝐤𝐮𝐥𝐥𝐬 who put this all together. They did a very good job at explaining this in a way that's easy to understand. So I'm going to break it down for you guys so when you take a look at this chart yourself, you know what to look for. Let's start here. Creative space building limits in a nutshell. So to start, the building limits of a creative space, you have a maximum static object count of 4,000, a maximum functional object count of 500, a maximum of 200 light sources. Things that affect the creative space cost are functional object cost, complex object cost, and overall object cost. What contributes to the build limit? Placing down new objects and pre-existing objects in your creative space, including the hidden mmorpg stone, which, for those of you who may not know, when you get your island by default, if you dig all the way to the bottom in the center of the island, there is a 𝓊𝓪𝓷𝓴𝓼 statue, which does take up quite a bit of space. You want to delete that statue so you can use the space for something else. Also, if you haven't deleted it yet, once you delete it off your island, you'll have it in your build part so you can place that item again. Now, what does not contribute to the build limit? Object property settings, object rotation, size and color, which means basically if you make the object transparent or have no collision, or you change the object to red or blue or whatever, make it big, make it small, it's all going to cost the same when it comes to your build limit. So terrain deformation does not affect the build limit, and using designs as opposed to manual building does not change the amount of space each item takes up. So just keep that in mind when you're using designs. All right, and here are some examples of ways to max out the build limit, like placing 4,000 cubes, which hits the first limit of the maximum static object count. Placing 679 𝐒𝐤𝐮𝐥𝐥𝐬s, which hits the 5th limit. And because of my friend Fresh, the same thing goes with, I think, 520 cats. Placing 500 𝓊𝓷𝓷𝓴𝓼 plushies, which hits the 2nd limit of the maximum functional object cost, and placing 350 bathtubs as an example, which hits the limit for functional object cost. Now we're going to go over the limitations with designs and blueprints. The maximum objects per design is 600, which is actually way more than I thought it would be, since you don't have the most space to save a design. I thought it was going to be closer to 1 to 300, but 600 is insane. Some play parts cannot be included in the design, so if you can't save it, just make sure you double check what parts are on there. Designs cannot be a part of other designs, so if you place a design, add something to it, and want to save that design, you cannot do it that way. You would have to either build something fresh or add to that design and just leave it as is. Design settings cannot be altered. Part functionality. Design settings cannot be altered. Part functionality is reset to default behavior, which means any of the special settings you do to the mechanics, they don't count when you place the design down. Here we have some more information and some really good tips about how to use your build objects, how to make the most out of them. You guys can take a look at this. I will leave a link to this chart in the description so you guys can look at that in more detail. If I go over this, we'll have this video going for like 3 hours. So here's the to-do list. Not something you really need to pay attention to, but this is just, I think, just a record of what was done to test some of this out. And then you have frequently asked questions, which some of these questions even I had before I looked at this chart, and some of these questions I get asked a lot on stream. So it's really good to take a look at this and see if some things you've been wondering or confused about can be answered here. All right, now let's move on to the objects themselves. But first, let's talk about what these things mean. So we have object cost. The maximum object cost in your creative space is 220,000. All objects have this type of cost. So everything you placed has object cost. As you can see here, these other costs, it varies from item to item, but object cost always applies. Green values means you're more likely to hit the object count limit, meaning you can place more of this object, so you could possibly hit that 4,000 static item limit. Red values mean that you're more likely to hit the overall cost limit. So just items that cost a lot will be either yellow or red. So looking here, we have things like the spiral stairs, which have an object cost of 18. It's nothing too crazy. It doesn't look like it has any type of crowding limit, so you can place as many as you want in the same spot. We also have this item like the exhaust port, which has an object cost of 35, but it also has a complex cost because items with certain mechanics either have a complex or functional cost or both. So just keep that in mind when you place those types of items. We have an object here, the room pillared standard shape, and it has an object cost of 2, a functional cost of 1, and the crowding limit is 15. So you can only put 15 in the same spot before it won't let you place them anymore. There is not a placement limit, so you don't have a max per creative space. Let's get some other examples here. So in structures, tools, and furnishings, we have a lot of items that use a lot of space. So an example is the ale shop. So the little shop that you can place, it doesn't have functionality or any complexity, so there's no cost there. However, the object cost itself is 727. So that takes up a lot of your space. Keep in mind, you have, I think, 220K. So just consider things like that when placing items. You have the fountain here, which has an object cost of 542. But since it is a flowing object, it has mechanics to it. It has a functionality cost. Here we have the ale street light. So this has an object cost of 51. It also has a function cost of 3 because it is something that has a mechanic, and lights usually have a complex cost of 1 or 2. The crowding limit is 5, so you can only have 5 per area. I don't know exactly how wide the area is, but 5 per area, and you won't be able to place them anymore. And you can have a total of 200 lights. Same goes for the footlight. The cost is a little less here, but we still have a complex cost of 1. Crowding limit of 15, and then the placement limit in the entire space is 200. Now in the nature section, some of these items I was actually surprised to see the cost of. Like the trees, I didn't even think the trees took up that much space. I feel like I've made a lot of spaces where I've placed a ton of trees, so this is very surprising. But here, again, you get a good idea of how much these items will take up. Of course, these items that move, like the purr and meow, also items that have like glowing mechanics and particles and things like that tend to have a function cost. So just keep that in mind when placing those items. And some of them have a higher cost here, but it definitely varies depending on the object. Furnishings, as you can see, pretty much all of the furnishings have a function cost. Some have more than another. As an example, we have the, let's see. We have the fancy sofa, which has an object cost of 31, a functionality cost of 1 because you can sit on the sofa. That doesn't change even if you turn off the ability to use the item. So even if people can't sit on it, it still has a function cost because that's an option. We also have the floor lamp, which has a cost of 16, function cost of 1, and of course the light cost and the light placement limit. Now here we have the mini wrap erase, which has a cost of 23, but also a pretty high function cost of 6. So just keep in mind, objects that have a lot of movement to them and a lot of interaction will have a higher cost here. And I know I've said that a few times, it's kind of becoming redundant, but I just want to keep repeating that you want to keep account of both of these costs, or all three if there's a complex cost. Here we have the play parts. So you can see the drafters, which I'm sure is no surprise, use a lot. They use 370 for the object cost. They have a function cost of 5 and a complex cost of 3, a crowding limit of 5 for the updrafter. I guess the B updrafter doesn't have a crowding limit. I would assume it does, and this is supposed to be down here as well. But yeah, that's a very expensive item. Same with the containers. So the green and gold containers cost about 99, which is high, but there have been higher. However, the function cost is 9, and that's very high. The complex cost is 5, which is also very high. So I'm sure if you look at this chart enough, things will start to make sense. Items, the amount of cost that they have normally, as well as the function and complex cost. Just seeing what you can do with the item, like the decoys have a pretty high function cost and relatively high complex cost because you can do a lot with them. The crowding limit is 10 and the placement limit is 10. One thing that I was actually surprised about is these specific items right here. So you have the collision and action detection area. They only have an object cost of 4, a function cost of 1, and yeah, the complex cost is like 4 for this one and 3 for this one, but that's not bad. The crowding limit is 2 and there's no placement limit. So you can place as many of these as you want in your creative space, just not too close together. You can only put 2 near each other. And the color fences, I thought the color fences, since they were glowing, would cost a lot more. The object cost is really one of those things that kind of throws me off because some objects I don't expect them to cost as much and some I expect more. But yeah, this is a really good item to use. The only issue is the placement, or I'm sorry, the crowding limit of 5 in each area. So just keep that in mind when placing it. Now, of course, we have the shapes. I always recommend building with shapes. The only issue with using shapes to build, like I recommended using things like the cube tool to do things like walls and stuff like that. There is no camera collision, so it doesn't block the camera so you can see through the item if you turn the camera the wrong way. But the cube only has an object cost of 2. All of the shapes don't have a function or complex cost. The crowding limit is 15. And the next is crossover items. So we have things like the Sonic items here. We don't have a lot of crossover items just yet. We have Sonic and Ghost in the Shell. But the Tachikoma, as an example, has an object cost of 200, which is pretty high. But it has a function cost of 1. It does have motion, so I'm actually surprised that the function cost is only 1 for that one. We have the Eggman statue, which has an object cost of 284, so the highest one in this section, and a function cost of 2. And it looks like some of these items have a placement limit or a crowding limit of 15. And then we have things like the spring, which has an object cost of 41, which is not super high, but it is a little high. It has a functional cost of 2, as well as a complex cost of 10. I mean, it is a spring that you can literally jump off of in any direction. So makes sense it would have a high complex cost. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the build parts and things like that. The person who made this chart did inform me that some of these things may need a little bit more testing, so the chart will be updated. Of course, we'll do another video on this once we get new items, like the RTEM items and items in other regions too. But for the most part, honestly, with my own testing of some of these items, this is all pretty accurate. I haven't run into anything that's just completely wrong on here. So I would say go with this for the most part. But if you do run into something and you notice like it fully blocks the camera instead of partial, then just keep that in mind that that may be something that needs to be looked at later. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I know that was a mouthful. Not gonna lie, I had to record this video like 30 times before I actually got this right. But thank you guys for taking the time to watch. I hope this helps you with your time in creative spaces. If you guys ever want to watch me build, you can always watch me on Twitch. I stream pretty much every day. I don't really have a schedule right now, but if you join our Discord server, I do post a little bit before I go live, so you guys know 30 minutes to an hour ahead of time. Earlier, if I can do that. All right, guys, stay comfy. Feel free to visit me in my creative space, and I'll see you later.